Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. The debate between protectionism and free trade is as old as modern manufacturing itself, from the 19th century throughout the 20th century, and it continues today. Do economies do better if they are protected from foreign trade, or is free trade more in countries' interests? Now, when I say country, that's kind of the nub of the real question, because there's no such thing as just a country's economy. There's no such thing as just America. When Donald Trump says America first, the question is, who's America? There's no question that when free trade agreements like NAFTA were first negotiated, those negotiators always put America first. They put corporate America first, as did Canadians put Canadian corporations first, and Mexico put the Mexican elite first. And there's no difference in now, except that Trump wants to renegotiate these, saying that he can get better deals for corporate America, even though he says he's going to do this in the name of American workers. All that being said, there are real problems with the free trade agreements, including NAFTA and TPP, of course. But this is what Trump got elected on. And here's a recent speech. This is February 17th at the Boeing plant.
I don't want companies leaving our country, making their product, selling it back, no tax, no nothing, firing everybody in our country. We're not letting that happen anymore, folks. Believe me, there will be a very substantial penalty to be paid when they fire their people and move to another country, make the product, and think that they're going to sell it back over what will soon be a very, very strong border.
A very, very strong border. Well, that means tariffs, and that's what Trump has been threatening. So are the issues he raises legitimate? Is the solution he's proposing possible and legitimate, which is a serious tariff wall against particularly American companies, he says, but a great deal, I believe, as much as 50% of American imports are actually multinationals based in the United States bringing products that are coming from other arms of the same multinationals. Is Trump really ready to take on corporate America and their global supply chain? Well, I shouldn't say train, I should say chain. Now joining us to discuss free trade and give us some historical context and to assess just what Trump is talking about is Heiner Flassbeck. Heiner is director of Flassbeck Economics, a consultancy for global macroeconomic questions, and the editor of Macroscope, I hope I pronounced it right, an internet magazine. Heiner is the former chief of macroeconomics and development of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. He's also co-author of the book Against the Troika, Crisis and Austerity in the Eurozone, which he wrote with Kostas Lapavitsas. Thanks very much for joining us, Heiner.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let's start with the basic concept. Put America first, says Donald Trump. As I said in the introduction, does that mean that the trade negotiators that represented the United States in the beginning with NAFTA and those that were involved in TPP and other of these type of trade agreements, did they not put America first?
No, clearly for them, they had American priorities, they had American targets, they had an American agenda, that's no doubt about it. Looking at the WTO and the GATT before, it was always very much dominated by the United States of America. And many developing countries, for example, complained that the American influence is too strong and America first is too strong in the past already.
Now, there's no question that these free trade agreements, to a large extent, were not just about access to foreign markets for American products. It was very much about being able to place sections of the global working class against the American working class and drive American wages down, including shipping jobs out, although automation probably had as much to do with job loss as that, but it certainly was a factor. But how does Trump, how can he possibly combine or balance his loyalty to corporate America, and he never stops talking about how important it is for billionaires to make money, and do what he says, bring jobs back, put up a tariff wall? I mean, that would drive American wages up, which I personally think is pretty good, but I just can't imagine him being serious about following through on that.
Absolutely. I mean, these are false contradiction, so to say, in many respects. So first of all, free trade, let me say that very clearly, free trade is a fiction. The good, efficient free trade does not exist in this world. There are many distortions to the ideal of free trade that neoliberal ideologists are advocating. This does not exist. For example, the outflow of direct investment from the United States to China or so, the catching up of developing countries has nothing to do with free trade in a traditional sense, or the sense as it was invented 200 years ago, and as many people would make you to believe that it still exists. This is the first thing that is important. The second thing is that for the United States, foreign trade is not the most important thing. For the United States, important is the domestic development and domestic growth and domestic investment. These are the driving forces of the economy, and I think you will rather soon learn that if he would be serious on his infrastructure program, that would be much more important to American jobs than exports and imports. But one point I should mention also is that the United States have a current account deficit now for more than 30 years, and this is clearly a burden on the American economy. It's always there. It is smaller than it had been, say, 10, 15 years ago in terms of in relation to GDP. But it is still there, and so far he has a point, and that point was also made by Obama and the G20 and elsewhere, that the surplus countries should do more to stimulate the domestic demand, and that the surplus countries like Germany, for example, should do more to stimulate wages. And one big country has done that. China has done it. China had huge wage increases. Their current account deficit surplus, went down. But Germany, for example, my country, has still the largest current account surplus in the world, and wages are not rising very much.
Why is this a weight on the American economy, that there's a current account deficit, particularly with China? Why does that matter to the American economy?
Well, in principle, it means a deficit means that you're losing jobs. Indeed, that's no doubt about it. So the country that is exporting more and importing less has a positive balance on jobs in foreign trade. The contributions from foreign trade to growth, for example, in Germany, are positive for the last 15 years or so. In the G20, there are only 2-3 countries that have positive contributions overall. But for most of the years, the United States contribution from foreign trade was negative, which means this is, so to say, a zero-sum game coming from the current account deficit and current account surplus, which is overlaying the normal benefits from free trade that we are hoping for, which, as I said, are very much an ideology. We do not know. Nobody knows what the real benefits from free trade are. But these contributions, the direct effect from current account surplus and deficits, are overlaying these general benefits from free trade that people are hoping for. And so the overall benefit from trade can indeed be negative for a country with a large current account deficit.
So what would be the consequences if Trump actually were to follow through? And I think even within the Republican Party, he's going to be seriously opposed, because a lot of American corporate interests do not want this. Certainly any sector of the economy that exports is afraid of a trade war. But if he follows through with what he just said in that clip, a strong border, and I think we've heard from him anything from 25 to even 35% tariffs, although they seem to, when he talks about it, he seems like he's targeting American companies that have offshored jobs, but I don't understand how he could have a tariff just against American companies shipping stuff in, and it's hard to believe he would do that.
That's definitely impossible, and it's much too difficult and much too sophisticated what these people, if they're thinking in these terms, are heading for. He should talk much more about the value of the dollar. The value of the dollar against the euro is definitely too high. The dollar is appreciated quite a bit against the euro in the last 1.5 years, and this brings about an effect that is as big as the import taxes they're talking about, or the tariff they're talking about. But the other problem is against developing countries like China and Mexico. This is very dangerous what he's saying, because these countries are doing something that is absolutely normal. They have a catching up process, and catching up means that you import sort of technology from the developed world, and you combine this imported sort of say high productivity with your low wages, and that gives you a competitive advantage. And to take that away from developing countries is really, really dangerous, because if it is not done by American companies, so the technology is not exported from the United States to the developing countries like China or Mexico, then first of all, other countries will do it. If you would try to prevent it overall, then the developing countries have still other options. They could do it like Japan and Korea, who never had this direct investment, but who, so to say, with the help of the government, created the capital that allowed them to catch up. So trying to stop this process is more or less impossible, and it's very dangerous, because it will, if it would be successful, it would be terrible for the developing countries. So this is really a silly point that he has.
Well, the China issue and the Mexico issue are different, because there's not a free trade agreement with China. There's a question straightforward, just the low wages being used to increase American corporation profits. They're producing stuff far more cheaply. On the other hand, there's a certain subsidy going on of American workers' living standards. If you go to Walmart and you can buy kids' clothing, a whole set of clothes for like $9 and $10 sometimes, that's because it's manufactured by someone who's making so little in terms of wages. But in terms of unraveling this relationship with China, changing the current account deficit, that's got nothing to do with changing the free trade agreement, because there isn't one. So that's just about a tariff wall and then a trade war with China. Where does that lead?
Well, as I said, that would bring about negative consequences for the U.S. economy also. And as I said, this process of catching up from developing countries, so that at a certain point the developing countries are producing the T-shirts and no longer American workers, is absolutely normal. And it's not a danger at all. It's not a danger to the U.S. economy. By the way, the U.S. economy, you shouldn't forget, has brought down unemployment much more than Europe has done in the last 5-6 years. So the U.S. economy was not so bad as many people are saying. Insofar, Trump has right to say we need more jobs, and we need better paid jobs, but that is not hampered, that is not stopped, so to say, by foreign trade and the movement of U.S. companies or other companies to developing countries. If he wants to do something for higher wages, then he should strengthen the unions. He could introduce new laws that give the unions much more strength than before. He could help with a real full employment policy. If you have a government dedicated to full employment, then wages will go up. What we see in the United States, despite the recovery in the last 5 years, is still very low wage growth, and it's one of the reasons why the U.S. economy is not really under steam, as it should be.
Now, you can't drive down wages in the United States and expect there to be more jobs. If you reduce demand in the United States, you're not going to give rise to more employment.
Definitely.
But this idea of offshoring jobs has been one of the pieces of the cause for less employment in the United States.
But I think it's overestimated. It's dramatically overestimated. I know there are many studies around back and forth, as well as there are studies for technology, but you have to be careful. Technology and, so to say, international structural change are not per se a force that drives down or up jobs. It always depends on the reaction of economic policy. So if you would compare Europe with the United States, and as I said, in the last 10 years or so, you would see that the United States are much more successful than Europe in creating jobs, although trade has developed in Europe in the same way, and technology has developed in Europe in exactly the same way as the United States. So this is an isolation of factors that I think is not justified.
So if your objective really is increasing employment in the United States and higher wages, then you're talking about more unionization, and you're talking about creating a stimulus plan that's government directed, a direct government employment plan, which means you finance that through prying through taxation of the upper echelon of the elites.
Well, you do it through taxation, or you do it through the capital market. They're both ways. The United States are in a very peculiar situation insofar as if you look at the financial sector balances of the United States, which are, so to say, the balances that show whether a sector is a net saver or a net debtor, then you see that in the United States now you have not only private households that are net savers, so that are reducing demand overall, but the company sector in the United States is also a net saver, which is very untypical, which we didn't have before. We have it in the last 10 years in many countries. But at the same time, you have a current account deficit, so that means the foreign countries are also a net saver for the United States. This means the United States is in a situation where at this moment of time, either you bring the companies back into the debt and into a debtor situation, which would mean to tax them higher or to take money away from them in one way or the other, or to encourage much higher wage increases or so, or the government has to take on more debt, because there must be a debtor always. There cannot be not only savers, there must always be a debtor.
Well, a lot of these corporations are sitting on mountains of cash.
They're sitting on mountains of cash. That's the problem. That's the main problem. It's not they're sitting on cash and they're not investing. So see, that is the problem we're facing. And insofar, any idea about cutting taxes for companies is absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy in this very situation. The only thing that could be reasonable, but I'm very cautious, is to increase taxes for companies so that they get rid of that amounts of cash in which they're sitting.
Okay, this is just the beginning of a discussion. Heiner's going to be joining us regularly in the future, and if you have questions you'd like us to take up, please just write us at contact@therealnews.com. That's contact@therealnews.com, or you can put them in the comments below the video. Thanks very much for joining us, Heiner.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.